I'm Brandon Staglin. I started this webcast 9 years ago as a survivor of schizophrenia because I wanted the public, and in particular people who experience mental health challenges, to understand that there's a lot of hope inherent in the amazing science being done by one mind-funded scientist to deliver better treatments for people who experience brain health challenges. Over the course of each year, new treatments are coming out. I also wanted people to understand that there's a very real prospect of recovery as modeled by people with lived experience who've recovered themselves and by sharing their stories. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your watching. So, as the number of infections and the death toll from the coronavirus continues to climb, we find ourselves in a period of collective and individual mourning, and that's the topic of our conversation today: is growing through grief during the coronavirus pandemic. For many in densely populated areas, people find that there are actually makeshift morgues right around the corner from their home, and the images on the nightly news are inescapable. All of us are dealing with feelings of loss and worry about the coronavirus. Death is at our doorstep. At the same time, the normal rituals of being at the side of a dying loved one, comforting those who have been bereaved, attending memorial services, and even saying goodbye in person have been disrupted by the pandemic, adding both feelings of stress and helplessness to what is already one of life's most traumatic types of experiences. And then there's the wider effect. Basically, all of us are experiencing loss of some kind: loss of our normal way of life, loss of our jobs in many cases, our security, our freedom, our routines. Even past losses are coming to take on greater significance in many people's minds, including mine, over the last several weeks. So how do we even begin to process all the challenges of grief and loss during this really difficult time? To joining us today are two amazing guests. We have Dianne Gray, who is an author, a global advocate, and an end-of-life and grief doula. She's also the past president and current board member of the Elisabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. And we also have another wonderful guest, Kathy Eldon, who is a filmmaker and an advocate as well. And she is the founder of the Creative Visions Foundation. And she's also the author of Angel Catcher, a journal of loss and remembrance. And both of these wonderful people have had tragic losses in their past, and they're well qualified to talk as a result. Dianne sadly lost her son, Austin, to a degenerative neurological disorder in 2005 at age 14. And Kathy lost her son, Dan, who was a 22-year-old photojournalist for Reuters news agency, who was covering the conflict in Somalia and was killed tragically in that time. So Dianne and Kathy, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your stories and your insights.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Dianne, my first question is for you. What inspired you to focus your work in the areas of palliative care and grief counseling?
Well, I think that a lot of people believe that it was due to the loss of my son, but it really wasn't. It was due to the loss of my dad when I was 9 and he was 39. He died of a sudden heart attack. And I learned then the very important life lesson that life is short. And from there, went on to study sports medicine and sports management in college. And as I studied, I also studied Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's work. And the basic message that life is short, live now, love unconditionally. And I saw, even in my research in school and college and onward, that people were missing some just fundamental resources. So I really became a resource person first and foremost. But then, second of all, kind of just, I don't know, decided to take a deeper dive on this following the death of my son, because I saw that so many people were not just suffering from death, but they were suffering during caregiving. And that was a focus of mine too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the work that you do. It's so important for people who are struggling with grief and loss.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. So the second question for you is,
Yeah.
so many of us are experiencing feelings of very turbulent, difficult feelings during this time of the pandemic. How much of that is actually grief, would you say?
Well, as we've talked earlier, and I think, and Kathy and I spoke earlier about this, one of the things that I've come to understand is that it's not for me to tell someone whether they're grieving or not. or whether a certain feeling is grief or not. If they think it's grief, it can be grief. But I do ask people to really give some thought to, is it loss or is it disappointment? And I think there is a difference between the two. So frequently my inbox is just slammed with people asking the question, don't you think that this is grief because my fifth grader can't go to fifth grade graduation, my daughter can't go to high school prom, my college daughter can't go to college graduation, they're not going to have the Olympics, what about the swimmers? Look at all that loss, look at all that grief. It really isn't for me to say you're not grieving. And maybe they are. I feel, however, that we should also ask, is this disappointment? Because the high school graduate is still graduating from high school. The fifth grader is still graduating from the fifth grade. But there is grief in letting go of one's dreams of what an experience would be like. Disappointment is a normal part of life, though, and I think that we can really help our children and our loved ones and students around us come to understand that disappointment is natural. We are going to have hundreds of disappointments, if not thousands, over our lifetime. So how do we incorporate those disappointments? But then also, too, if it is grief and if it is loss, then how do we incorporate that? Because certainly this is not going to be our only experience with grief and loss. And we will get past this pandemic. We will move forward. And I think that the more we can try to incorporate hope and fulfillment and gratitude and acceptance as part of the experience, the better off we're going to be after this, even if we're experiencing grief. To not just focus on the grief, but also focus on the gratitude and the experience as well, the positives that can come out of it. And I do believe for everyone, there are some positive things. We might have to look for them, but I think they're there.
Yeah, thank you. I like to think if you lose somebody that you love, at least in my case, I lost my grandmother in 2012, and she was very close. We were very close together as our relationship, and I focus on the fond memories that I have of her, and I still quote the funny Nebraska sayings that she used to have, and that brings me a lot of joy. I still feel, in a sense, she's still with me. I feel those positive feelings about her. Yeah.
And they're not, the two are not separate. We can feel gratitude while we're feeling grief. We can feel hope while we're feeling lost. People often confuse the fact that they think that they're only grieving or they only feel this or that. We grieve all kinds of things, like even the parent who has the child graduate from high school or college and go through the typical graduation experience. Also, too, they might feel joy, but they also feel a sense of grief because their child has grown and is moving out of the house. So I ask us all to understand that there is an element of grief or loss in every transition. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense, and something we all experience in different ways.
True.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Kathy, your organization, Creative Visions Foundation, was inspired by your son, his adventurous spirit, and his zest for life. What enabled you to transform your grief following his loss?
I think it was survival. I honestly think that I would have imploded if I hadn't used that grieving energy in some positive way. And right after Dan was killed, I spoke to the head of Reuters, who was in Kenya, where we had the memorial service. And I said, these lives cannot be in vain. We have to do something. And I was really lucky because they climbed on board and really helped me transform the horror of that loss into something powerful and positive. And I think for so many people, and often it's mothers, by the way, who have lost a child due to something, or to a person due to something, that you want to take that something and put some energy into it. Like Mothers Against Drunk Driving is such a wonderful example. But truly, you can put that energy into a window box or, a fund for a kid down the road who might need something. So it doesn't have to be something massive. In my case, I was lucky to be focused on journalists at risk, Dan was killed by a mob together with 3 other young journalists. So it was a very obvious thing for me as a journalist to really care about journalists at risk. So I spent several years really focused on that issue. And then I realized that I was kind of almost pushing my own grieving to one side. And, you can do that for a while, but most of us discover that if you push it down, might come up as illness, it might come up as depression, all kinds of things. And I know you all understand what I'm saying. So it was really important to deal with the profound grief that I was bearing as I was trying to be brave and carry on. And actually, my daughter and Amy was only 19 when Dan was killed, and she had dropped out of college, just couldn't go on at that point, and was suffering in her environment. And one day she called me. She said, "Mom, I can't do this anymore. I really can't." And I said to her, and I cast about. I was in my bedroom, and there was an angel catcher, a dream catcher, over my bed. And I said, "I know, Amy, you can make an angel catcher." And she said, "What's that?" Like rolling her eyes. And I said, "It's to capture an angel. It's to catch the essence of Dan. It's the photographs and the images and the poems and anything you can think of that will remind you of your brother and how you felt about him." Because what happens is memories fade, as we all know. So Amy came back from college with from her whatever, with her angel catcher in tow, and together we created a book, which many of you may have seen, but it's called Angel Catcher, and it's a journal of loss and remembrance. And you don't need to buy an angel catcher; you can make your own. And I really urge you, or you can go to the library, but to create a space where you can go through your feelings and put them out. Nobody in the world has to see it but you. You might find there's some treasures in there that you want to share further, but do capture those feelings, the essence of who that person was to you, and will remain always. Because the sharpness of memories tend to dissipate. So that was the second thing. And then a few years later, I realized that I craved the energy of creative activists, like energy like Dan, of people who saw a challenge and just rolled up sleeves and wanted to do something. So we started an organization, a nonprofit called Creative Visions, which I would invite all of you to check out because it's got something for everybody. Wherever you are in your life, you have a creative spark within you. And right now, that creative spark may seem like it's flickering because we all crave the activity and the energy around us. But that creative spark right now is probably the time to really blow on it and see what you can light with that flame. And we're all about creative, looking around, seeing what the issues are in the world around you, and then finding a way to impact those issues. And we're very concentrated on, communication. And Brandon, we would call you a creative activist because you're taking the issue that is profoundly important to you and communicating it in the hopes that people can really benefit as a result of it. So all of that came out of the worst thing that could ever happen to a mother.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much goodness and so much goodness still possible. I haven't given up. I'm still at it. But
Fantastic.
this is all information for not if something happened to you yesterday. I mean, really, truly, this can all just sound like a bunch of hokey, because you think you'll never be happy again. But just store it in your head and know that these things are possible.
Fantastic. And it's possible to turn these tragedies and ultimately into triumphs for so many people beyond ourselves. And thank you for profiling how you've done that. So Kathy, are there tools or techniques that people can use in general to help them manage their grief so it's not so intense and debilitating and so overwhelming?
I've been talking a lot about this conversation that we're having, Brandon, and somebody said to me that she described grief as opening a window of grief. That when grief, the window opens, you don't know when it's going to open. It opens, and it can be incredibly intense. I'm on the ocean. The waves pound at the shore. They come, and they come regularly. Grief is not actually like an ocean because it doesn't come regularly. It just comes at you, and you're slammed against the seawall or you're slammed against the beach. I think that early on, that grief will be intense no matter what you try to do with it. But I think in the interim, in the periods between that sense of where you just want to cry your eyes out, and you probably do, And that's fine because you need to do that. And what I was told early on is that if you sob, then your solar plexus gets massaged and then you almost immediately feel a little better. If you try to hold it back and you try not to cry, it's probably going to get worse or take longer. So just go at it, sob, invest in Kleenex. It's just awful. That period is awful. But when you're not in that period, that's the time to really nurture yourself, really look after yourself, and really communicate how you're feeling. I think often people want to tiptoe around you and they don't really want to bring up the person who might have died. They don't really want to talk about it because they just don't know what to do. But if you can keep that person, if you feel comfortable, everybody has a different way of grieving. Some people don't want to talk about it at all. Other people, really want to not feel like that person is gone forever from your life. So find your own route and feel comfortable in knowing that that's your route through grief. But my main point is to please express it in whatever way you can. And if you're a runner, go run. If you make craft. If you knit. But try to get it out of you, because when it's in, it can make you very ill. It really is.
Thank you so much for sharing that. My sister, when our aunt passed away recently, a few years ago, my sister took that grief that she was experiencing and turned it into her drive to run a marathon. She actually ran a marathon that year, the Nap Valley Marathon. I'm so proud of her. She's used that inspiration, turned it into something positive, and very proud of my sister to do that. So thank you, Kathy. Now I have a question for Dianne.
Sure.
Okay. Dianne, what lies beyond the 5 stages of grief? You've often talked about that everyone experiences grief differently. Mm-hmm. So the 5 stages of grief may not be experienced in the same way for different people, but it's important to move beyond the 5 stages, you said, in order to maybe find the meaning or process it more individually. Can you please explain your thoughts on that?
Happily. Because just to clear this up, so Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, hospice pioneer, did research with hundreds and hundreds of dying patients. And basically she found that there were similarities in terms of their feelings. And she published this book in 1969 called On Death and Dying. And in it, she spoke about the 5 stages. But they were just a format for people's feelings. And even as early as 1973, she testified before Congress and said, here are some similarities for the things people are feeling, and can we move on now? Like, no one would hang out to dry the first cancer researcher saying, that first researcher. No, they go, we had to start somewhere. Like, everybody has to start somewhere, and Elisabeth started somewhere. She was the first person, in that early bunch of people to bring the conversation about death and grief out of the closet. They used to put dying people, they sequester them in hospitals, and they would lock them away in rooms. And in one hospital in particular, they would chain them to the beds. You weren't allowed to talk about death. You weren't allowed to have a dying person out into the living room. Elisabeth was really a part of the key movement to change all of that. So from there, people started taking the 5 stages and adapting it to grief and loss. The net of it is this. People go through some of the stages, none of the stages. Other researchers have said, they don't exist. I get email every day. There are 11 stages, 7 stages, no stages. It's all good. It really is. Whatever you feel or one feels is appropriate for them is fine. We all grieve differently and as individually as our DNA. It's really that simple. Because no 2 people love the same. Even 2 people that love the same person do not love that person exactly the same, so their grief will be different. So past the 5 stages, I would say it's really all integrated anyway. Most people feel some sort of shock, either at their own grief or the depth of their feelings, or at the loss, or the fact that the person died, or maybe some little secret that was back in the closet anyway. I've seen it all. But the important thing is to recognize that our grief is rooted in love, for sure, without fail. Even hatred is rooted in love. And love and fear are 2 very separate things. Things that come from love are gratitude, appreciation, expansive thought, abundance. Fear has to do with lack, scarcity, anger, a whole bunch of other things. That's what lies beyond just the rudimentary conversation around the 5 stages. Recognition that we're basically rooted in love and fear. And if we can take a look at those, where do we feel anger? Typically, it's because we're afraid or feeling fear about something. Where do we feel abundance and gratitude? It's because we're feeling the root, which is love. And so the more we can concentrate, even in the midst of grief, abundance, appreciation, gratitude, it is possible. People say there's absolutely no way until we talk about the fact that joy and sorrow, and for example, in Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, joy and sorrow are interwoven. Why? Because we cannot feel sorrow for that which we did not once feel joy.
Mm.
They sit at the same bedstand, it says. And it's really that simple. So when people are deep in the muck of grief, thinking that they cannot possibly move, and then I say, well, you know what? A lot of people never had a soulmate, never know what it's like to be married for 10 or 20 or 40 years. Some people actually do go through life without having a soulful love. Or in my case, I lost a child. A lot of people do not have children. I am blessed to have had the love of my son. So is gratitude a part of my loss? Absolutely. It's almost always the case. Same with pets, same with people, children, loss of a job, right? We wouldn't know what it is to feel that significant loss if we did not at one time feel the joy for that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thanks for going over that, and just knowing that we have had that love in our lives can be a source of consolation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Next question is for Kathy. So right now, during the coronavirus pandemic, we're going through a time of challenging open-endedness, but you have a saying that I really like called "There's no way out but through." Mm-hmm. How will we know, and when will we know that we are through this crisis?
What a good question that is. I personally don't think that, looking back, I did a little book called No Way Out But Through. And it was a book where I was drawing the images, and I had the image of entering into what was essentially a tunnel with an endless tunnel with no glimpse of light. And then you see this little pinprick of light that you're heading towards, sort of brailing your way through the tunnel, trying to get to that light. But when you stumble out of that tunnel, and it could take 2 years, certainly grieving takes a long time, and you sort of see the light, and then it retreats and you come back to it. But when you get through that tunnel, as it were, everything's different. Things don't look the same as they did. You don't look the same. You look at people and you view them differently. So you get through, you're out the other side, but you're not back to where you started. You're way further down. And I think that we're going to get through this. Yes. What I've also heard is you can get through something, you don't necessarily get over it. You get over it. You get through it, but you don't necessarily get over it. So I don't think we're going to get over this. And I think we will get through it, but we will be experiencing a very different world and a very different us. So I think we can pinch ourselves and say, oh, hallelujah, I'm back in a restaurant and we're not wearing a mask. How cool is that? But I think everything will be different. And I like to think that there will be wonderful changes and shifts as a result of this extraordinarily painful time for hundreds of millions of people, billions of people. Imagine that. Right now, 22 million people are on unemployment. We can't even fathom the pain in India, where people are starving, or Kenya, where people are starving. So the world is going to look different, and we're going to look different. And it's, again, how do we transform the horror of what has happened to the world for this moment in time and to those around us and those we've lost and loved into something that is positive? And I think that's where all of us, wherever we are, that's the opportunity that we have to really think about the world we want and how we want to be showing up in that world. So I can't answer your question. I have no idea when we're going to be through this, but certainly this is our opportunity to stand still and say, you know what, that old world, we thought it was terrific in many ways, but it really sucked in other ways. And so let's do it better this next time.
So Dianne, thanks for all of what you said so far. What are some key takeaway points you'd like viewers to remember about managing grief and loss during this challenging time of the crisis?
Be kind to yourself first and foremost, meaning take a bath, take a shower, indulge in water, exercise, eat well. Eat well meaning eat healthily. But also try, if you can, to write down 3 things at the end of each day. I'm a huge fan that you're thankful for. I'm a huge fan of the practical tips and tools and kind of hacks to get through this kind of time. It's tough. And I'm right there with a lot of people. People think, oh, just because she knows, a lot about grief and works in the space that it's better, easier. No, I am literally right there shoveling with people a lot of days. But I do know and appreciate these hacks, and they're all research based. So, one from Stanford research, being in, near, around nature for 20 minutes, walking through nature for 20 minutes if you can, if you have access to that. And if you can't walk in your neighborhood, of course, apply common sense, follow the rules, safe distancing, et cetera, with the mask and the whole bit. Do all that. You have to stay safe. But another thing too that you can do are things like eat well, eat healthy food. Why? Because we know stress is tough on the body, and if you eat sugar and you eat junk, you're not going to help yourself cope, and you have to stay above water for the people around you. If you are enduring social isolation, and in fact, we've talked about this, it's an important thing. That's a big thing. That's not a little thing. Being isolated in your home by yourself is a very big deal. So we also have to work a little harder to reach outside of our comfort zone to connect with people. Connection is super important, and it also has a role in our physical health. Got to be attentive to that as well. I'm sorry to say this, guys, alcohol sales are up 55%. I love the whole, Napa and I do. I mean, I love a great glass of wine, but 3 glasses of wine, not okay for most women, and that's research, right? So, and if you're going to have wine and you're going to indulge in alcohol, do it within the context of what is safe and healthy for your body, because we're going to come out of this. And when we come out of this, you don't want to be that person that says, well, I just beat myself up for, 3 months, 10 months, however long it takes. So I would practice, as much as possible, those things that will keep you healthy and well, and as well, grow to understand that being in, near, around, under the water is healthy for us. It shifts our mindset. There's a reason people cry in the shower. They do. If you ever talk to grieving people, they'll tell you, how did you know that? How did you know I cry in the shower? Because almost everybody cries in the shower at some point. So it's good. As Kathy was saying earlier, let those emotions flow. And if you feel stuck, get in a bathtub and get in the shower. We come from water. We are in the womb in a watery world. Lights out. Get in the water, get in the tub, get in the shower. And this is science-based. There's a great book called Blue Mind by Wallace J. Nichols. It's about the neuroscience of what happens to our bodies when we're around the water. It's very soothing and very calming. And the last thing that I wanted to share is choose your tribe. Here's the thing to that. Choose the people that you're listening to and that you're around. Be selective during this time of coping with coronavirus. Why? We all have those people in our world that shall remain nameless. We push our buttons, right? If we can, we have to cope with some of them. We all have family members that do that, right? But if we can just limit that, all right, knowing that if we can keep those conversations short and the soothing, healing conversations a little bit longer, and also a part of every day, allow ourselves to have some space for peace and quiet, meditation and prayer, whatever you choose in that realm. Please try to do it 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. It really helps a lot.
And fantastic. We have to take care of ourselves during this challenging time, and because we will come out of it. And mental and physical health are so intertwined. And what you're saying about the water, being near water, I saw a study that showed that mental health in the population is better near bodies of water.
Absolutely.
So that totally makes sense. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Dianne, excuse me, Kathy. Kathy, thanks for coming on our show today. Like to ask you the same question. What are some key takeaway points for managing grief and loss?
I would say Dianne, who is the specialist in this and does it every day of her life, has really covered just about anything I can think of. I've talked about the importance of journaling and expressing oneself. I've talked about the importance of transforming that which is the worst thing that can happen into something powerful and positive. That's my experience, and I really believe in it. And the only thing that I think I would add to what Dianne has so eloquently expressed is find a way to laugh. And I remember it's so hard, but if you have to put on reruns of I Love Lucy, or, especially if you can find a small child, that helps, but find a way to make yourself laugh or be able to laugh, and just exercise those muscles as well. And remind yourself again that as bad as it is, there will be a time when you will laugh, you will dance. You really will. And just keep reminding yourself of that, and hang in there, folks. Don't give up. It's going to be okay. Play a lot of Bob Marley. Everything's going to be all right. I literally played it this morning. So
fantastic.
Be on it.
Yeah, that album Exodus, it's so uplifting. When I listen to it, I feel cleansed. My soul feels cleansed.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. So another question for you both. This is our last question. What words of hope do you have for our viewers? Is there a way to find meaning in all that is going on around us that we can add to our lives going forward? First Dianne, and then Kathy.
So on the topic of meaning, I think I'm going to refer back to right after my son died. We'd been living for about 10 years, very similar to this time of coronavirus, quite honestly, because Austin was so sick and he was bedbound for 5 years. And bedbound meaning I couldn't really move him easily without breaking a bone. He was on oxygen. He was medically fragile, which many people in our country experience as caregivers. So we experienced living in a 10 by 14 room for years on end. And when we came out of it, it was a lot like when you're in a dark room and all of a sudden the light gets turned on. I think that's going to happen for a lot of people here. I think we're going to go out into the new world kind of out of a cave saying, well, what's it like? So I think two things real quick. In terms of associating meaning, I can't tell someone else how they're going to find meaning in this experience. But back in 2005, I went to a church service, and the pastor said, in New York City, the pastor said, I told you my golden retriever would make her voice crappy.
Oh,
So,
what a sweetheart.
how do we find meaning? And what the pastor asked is, who are you becoming? And this is an amazingly powerful time. It's a gift, folks, to be able to take it down, take it a little bit slower, downshift a bit, and actually have the opportunity to ponder, as they say, think about one's navel, the belly button, and go, who am I becoming? Or who do I want to become after this? And I think who do I want to become after this is how we're going to assess meaning and help us find our way through this. And I think there's tremendous hope in that this too shall pass. We've been through generationally the Holocaust, World War II. Families have endured loss in significant ways. I'm going to use, not to do product endorsement, my furry child right now.
Nourish your child.
Yeah, I think that we can find hope in many, many ways, but it requires being still. And I think that's my sort of nugget, the takeaway, how to help each person find meaning. Kathy, what do you think?
I was going to say that I don't think you find meaning necessarily, you create meaning. Because it's just like you don't find yourself in a way, you create yourself. And we all think we're going to go find this meaning, but you can create it. And you can say, I am dedicating this, this, and this, or that to that loved one whom I've lost, or I'm going to create meaning out of this chaos, out of this lost feeling I'm getting. And that's, I guess it's the same as finding, but finding implies you have to go searching. Creating is a more active, like, I'm going to do this. So I'd say go create, just do it, damn it.
I love that. I feel the same way. It's like agency is a means of meaning in itself. It's finding meaning through agency.
Yeah.
Totally on board. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you. You guys have been just so wonderful. Everything you've had to say has been so helpful. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please go to onemind.org/brainwaves. You're welcome to go there and ask those questions for Dianne or Kathy until Friday of this week, April 17th, 2020. And look forward to seeing you next week on next week's great episode of Brainwaves. Here are some resources on grief on the web, grief.com and healthguide.org. Feel free to check those out. Dianne, Kathy, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Thank you.
We're grateful. I'm grateful.
Me too. Grateful. All right. Take care.
Thank you.